WNST, it's House in Baltimore. I don't know that when I talk about professional wrestling, whether we're in sports or entertainment or some combination thereof, but I've been talking for months about the Andre the Giant special coming out on Tuesday night on HBO. It is in my DVR, so I have not watched it yet, so pardon me for that, but I will get around to watching it. But before I do, I really thought long and hard of like who the people I could have on the show this week to commemorate the life of Andre the Giant. I want to do the same thing for Howard Cosell. It's his 100th birthday this month, so the history of me doing this for 27 years. And I thought, man, who is still alive and still around that I could get on the phone, who's in my phone? And the first person I thought of was this guy. He rolls through town once every year or two and does a live stage show. He was a big voice of my youth on Saturday mornings at Channel 20 and then Saturday afternoons on Channel 45. And sometimes if I could pick up Channel, was it 47, 19, whatever it was out of Philadelphia, I would hear the tones of the great Gary Michael Cappetta, and we found him. He writes books and still does the wrestling thing these many years later, but many times, if you go back onto YouTube and look at old videos of Andre the Giant, you'll see Gary Michael Cappetta running somewhere around Philadelphia or up there in Allentown, Pennsylvania with Andre the Giant. We welcome the great Gary Michael Cappetta back onto the program here. He is a frequent visitor for all things wrestling and the history of wrestling, and I'm glad you're out there to weave some Andre the Giant stories, Gary Michael Cappetta. How you been, pal?
Hey, Nestor, I'm good. You know, that introduction was packed with some fighting words, my friend. What do you mean sports or entertainment?
It's both.
Have you seen the athleticism of these guys? It's, especially today's product. Athletes all the way, you know, my friend? I mean, yeah, it's not, you know, we're not talking about a true competition as to who's going to win or not, but, ooh, these young athletes today in the WWE and Ring of Honor and so forth, wow, they'll just blow your head off.
Just don't call it fake, right? Whatever you do, it's not fake. You know, we're not going to call it that. But, you know, for you, I'm up on your Twitter and old pictures of you. And Andre, there's a picture of you, and you're doing an event here on July 6th. And we'll talk about your stage show and stuff. But part of all of that was that you didn't have a backstage pass or a front row seat. You were literally in the ring, and you were literally in the locker rooms. You were literally, you know, one of the first guys at the building, working through all the bumps, all the stuff. Sometimes you were involved in the bumps and the stuff at various points. But for Andre the Giant, you're one of the guys who really would be an expert on this. Some of the guys didn't live long enough to tell these stories. Andre's been gone 25 years. I mean, that's to me, that's kind of, he's still alive to me to some degree, right?
Yeah, I hear you. I mean, we hung out. I was with WWE for 11 years, and you know, so Andre would, when Hulk Hogan couldn't make a show, or Bruno Sammartino wasn't a headliner, or one of the WWE champions like a Bob Backlund or a Pedro Morales, Andre would pack the house. There's just no doubt about it. He was magnetic. He was magnetic in a very subdued, gentle way. You can't define charisma. Sometimes you would think of somebody, you know, would rush into a room or rush onto a stage and the lights would go on and they'd be all flashy and you'd say, wow, that guy or gal is charismatic. Andre just was Andre, and he just needed to be himself. He was, the people that he liked, he would always call boss. Hey, boss, how you doing?
Okay.
Boss. And luckily, I was one of the people that he liked. Because if he didn't like you, you would know it. And you would, if you had any brains, you'd stay out of his way.
I would say a man of his size and of his stature, right? Like he would be the bear you would not want to poke, right? Literally.
Right. Yeah. And if he didn't like you, there was a good reason. You were probably a real jerk, you know. Or he saw that it may have been like a fellow headliner, and he saw them being a jerk to the ring attendant, you know, or talking down to someone, and. Yeah, I mean, I was with him on his last television broadcast in September of 1992. he was a special guest along with Bruno Sammartino on the WWE's opposition at the time, WCW on TBS. And it was a special celebrating 20 years of NWA wrestling on TBS. And in fact, my tour picture for my stage show is a picture that was taken that night. After the show, there was an after party. And Andre and Sammartino were sitting at the bar, and I went over and say hi and whatever, ribbing each other.
And they were friends, right? I mean,
sure.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. And so I said, "Come on, guys, let's get a picture." And George Napolitano, who's a famous wrestling photographer,
sure,
happened to be walking by. I said, "Come on, George, let's get a picture." So I sit down on a stool in between the two. And as George is saying, okay, 3, 2, and when we get to the one, Andre's paw engulfs my face. And I have that picture. I have to find that picture. And then we did another one, which was a great picture that I use as one of my tour photos. So that was the last TV appearance that Bruno had. It was that Andre had. It was September of 1992. And he passed away in January of 93.
Gary Michael Cappetta is our guest. He does these incredible beyond body slams. You've done books. You've sat in my studio. We've been friends for going on 20 years now, and I know in my childhood I would see you doing championship wrestling and all-star wrestling in those house shows up in Allentown, and you'd show up at the Spectrum when I would go up there to see Bob Backlund and Killer Khan or Sergeant Slaughter back in the 80s and all that stuff. But you come to town. Tell everybody what you do here. July 6th, you're coming to Baltimore, and you bring a wrestling show with you. And by the way, Gary, it might not be a bad week for you to bust out all those Andre stories and pictures and all that stuff, because the Andre story is going to be hot because of this Bill Simmons thing, I think, right? I think it's going to bring back some nostalgia for the next 90 days in the same way the Ric Flair thing, 30 for 30, did about 6 months ago, right?
Absolutely. You're right. Last time I was in town was about 14 months ago. I brought my stage show in. When I come in on July 6th, it's going to have all new topics. I perform in front of a giant video screen. So as I'm telling you the story about the night Mick Foley lost his ear in Munich, Germany, and they flipped it to me, you're seeing it on the screen. Or the night that Arn Anderson, Sid Vicious got into a nasty scissor fight, and they were all bloody and cut up in England, you're seeing it on the screen. So it's a lot of stories. It's a lot of fun. I interact with the audience. I love Baltimore. Baltimore and I, there's just something special.
Well, it's a wrestling town. I mean, I'm not going to, we're talking about a football town. I mean, it's always been as good a wrestling town as there was on the Star. I mean, it was the one place originally that McMahon and Turner kind of fought, right? Or at that point, it was the NWA at that point and Georgia Championship Wrestling. But this was the original battleground of the North and the South of wrestling, right?
It was one of the few cities that, in fact, it was the only northern city that the NWA beat the McMahons, where at some point, at the time it was the Baltimore Arena, where they said to McMahon said, "Look, you let those NWA wrestlers in, and we're not coming back." And we did such big business that the arena management said, "Well, then don't come back." And they didn't, for years.
Well, I remember when Georgia Championship Wrestling came in here with Tommy Rich and with Ric Flair and with Austin Idol, and and some of the guys were the Tony Atlases that had been back and forth. Austin Idol had been back and forth, but by and large, I mean, Harley Race, that never touched the WWE. But Andre, to move the conversation, Andre was a guy who went everywhere, right? He was the original free agent, and I don't even know who put him in a ring the first, whether it was Vern Gagne or whether it was Vince Sr., but he literally did the national circuit at a time when that was kind of unheard of, right?
Well, yeah, but he was, his contract was controlled by Vince McMahon Sr. So Vince was his agent.
Okay.
And
I did not know that. Okay.
Yeah, and he farmed him out to all of the, because at the time, you didn't have exposure to other territories, to other wrestling in other areas. So you always had to refresh your talent. And so instead of Andre going and doing nothing for a few months, to take him out of the loop, he would farm him out and send him up to Canada and send him to Chicago and L.A. and Miami and then, get involved in feuds outside. But, yeah, Vince McMahon Sr., he was, he held his contract. For as long as I remember.
Well, I'm going to watch the special, and I'm sure, if you were doing a 90-minute special on Andre the Giant, it would be about beauty and sadness, wouldn't it? It would be about how, incredibly joyful it was for me to be a 9-year-old boy at the Baltimore Arena in 1978 and high-five him and be at the arena early where he would walk in the side stage door and would walk across the stage so everyone could see him arrive with his little backpack and his the stuff he had with him, and he would come out for the battle royals and stand around the ring, and if you were, as a little boy, I could run down to the ring and high-five him, and I did. I wish I had pictures of that kind of stuff, just to see how big of a man he was, standing next to very big men to begin with. Bruno was not a small man, right? None of these guys were. Ken Patera was not a small man. And I guess 40 years later, it is kind of a sad story, right? His life story about the beer drinking and the money and this and that and the fame and all that, and television and the $6 Million Man and all the other things I remember, Sasquatch, all that stuff, he had a lonely existence, right?
You're absolutely right. And that's the kind of thing I'm going to talk about on my stage show when I come to Baltimore, where he brought such joy to people, but his personal life was very painful. You cannot be that big, travel and fly every night, and be in a different hotel room every night, and be comfortable. You don't fit into airline seats. Perhaps you have to buy 2 tickets and lift up the arm in between. There's never going to be a hotel bed that's going to fit. You're never going to be able to walk through a doorway without stooping. You're never going to be able to go into a hotel shower without either getting on your knees or stooping down to get underneath the shower nozzle. You're never going to walk through an airport or go into a pizzeria or a rental car agency or anywhere without people gawking at you.
Well, he's literally, and I don't mean to be, this is not mean, he literally was a freak. The definition of a freak, that when you're 7'4" and you're walking places and you are famous like that, and he got more famous. You knew him before he was really famous. In the 70s, he was wrestling famous. Then he started like Mike Douglas and sort of became a little bit of the freak on the Johnny Carson sort of, on that circuit of celebrity above and beyond just being a wrestler, right?
Yeah, and I would say the Princess Bride put him over. The Princess Bride made him legendary in film. And if you talk to young kids today, or younger people today, they know him from that movie because it's a cult favorite. But
that didn't come along until '87. I was watching him wrestle in the late '70s, right?
Right. Yeah. That was later, but that really is for the person that's not the hardcore wrestling fan. That's how a lot of people know Andre, from that cult movie. Because it's on all the time on cable and so forth. So yeah, he was. You're absolutely right, though. He the joyful and sadness. He brought people a lot of joy, and yet, especially towards the end of his life, where he was in such pain, it was really. He probably stepped into the ring toward the end of his career, later than he should have. If you look at, I think,
he couldn't move. The last 5 years in the ring, it wasn't good, right?
I've seen footage of Andre in Japan during his last active year, and he had difficulty getting in the ring. It was sad. You're absolutely right. The two opposites. But I have this photo that I'm gonna be projecting. It's a younger Andre walking through an airport, and he stops, and there's this little boy. Boy may have been 3-4 years old, and his eyes are just bugging out of his head, and he's looking up at Andre, and Andre's smiling down at him. And it's just a magnetic view, because now you would think that the kid would be running away. I mean, here's this giant that's towering over him, with his hair all over going all over the place. But Andre was, he drew people in. He didn't push people away. Amazing.
He is Gary Michael Cappetta. You can follow him at Gary Cappetta. That's 2 P's, 2 T's, out on Twitter. He is coming to town on July 6th. Legendary WWE, as well as other promotions and doing wrestling ring announcing for a long, long time. Beyond Body Slams is the tour. You get your tickets at Eventbrite, but find him out on Facebook as well as on Twitter. And the books are still available, right?
They are, yeah. You can get them online at BarnesandNoble.com and Amazon. Sure.
Well, your whole game, over the last 20, 30 years has been telling these stories to some degree. You have a beer drinking story with Andre the Giant. Phil Jackman used to tell me the story about him, and I should grab Phil to come on as well, about the time they were drinking at the Belvedere and at the Chesapeake here in Baltimore, and they went out, and Andre had to pee, and they went into an alley, and the two of them, this is in the early 1970s, peeing against the wall in the alley. He said a cop turned and put the light on them and saw the size of Andre, said hello to Andre, no problem, backed up, turned out the alley, kept going, and he said it was the damnedest thing he'd ever seen in his life, that, he and Andre taking a pee in an alley, and the cop would see that it was Andre the Giant and just say, no problem, boss, have a good night.
thought he had opened a fire hydrant.
Well, I don't think there's any doubt about that. I mean, you were in a couple of those establishments. The stories of how much he could drink are part of the legend of Andre, too, right?
Yeah, the legendary the story was 119 beers.
That's all.
In one sitting. Yeah, but, it was to mask a pain.
Is that true? I mean 109. I mean,
yes. It was true. It was true more than once.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. I mean, he liked his alcohol. There's no doubt about it. When he stepped in the ring, he was lucid. He was never buzzed before performing. That would just have put his opponent in danger.
Yeah, I would say.
I mean, you have you have faith in each other that you're handing your body over to your opponent, that he's going to take care of you. But afterwards, just to dull the pain, he would, 119 beers. I mean, that's, when you think of it, it is.
Well, when I stack
incredible.
up, you stack up 24, right? 48. And if you stack it up, you carry 4 cases of beer and then add another case and a half on the top. That's a lot of beer, dude. I mean, that's a heavy. That would cause the fire hydrant or the fire hose, as you would say. Last thing for you, you watched WrestleMania last weekend and what this has become, and so much heat on the Saturday now, where, as you pointed out early in the conversation, the athleticism has sort of bought out over all the Hollywood, Vegas lights and all of that stuff. But what wrestling has become, could you have ever imagined 40 years ago when you're getting in your jalopy and driving up to Allentown to call house shows with Gino and Vince Jr. and Vince Sr. still around and whatnot, that it would become that it would become this thing, literally this thing, WrestleMania and wrestling and worldwide, that it's become as big as it's become in your lifetime?
Absolutely not. No, I mean, there weren't the vehicles to make it happen. But even as big as it got when WrestleMania started, WrestleMania 1 to WrestleMania 3, Pontiac Silverdome, 90,000 people, where Andre met Hogan, you couldn't have envisioned that 3 years before. Never mind what it has become today.
Did you do the first WrestleManias?
I did not. No.
You've never done a WrestleMania?
No.
Okay.
Howard Finkel did the early WrestleMania.
Fair enough. Yeah, I know there were several of you, and you're always the voice of wrestling for me, Gary. I mean, I'm not even kissing your butt, but I watched a lot of wrestling, and when I did, I don't watch wrestling anymore. Many people do, right? I mean, on my Facebook over the weekend, I had dozens of friends of mine, and maybe it's the Dundalk background, I don't know. They were all in New Orleans, all with their kids, all with their buddies, all having a good time. Some of them were dressed up like Mil Mascaris and Dusty Rhodes. And The Undertaker, amongst others. But it really has become a lifetime of fascination with wrestling, and there's nothing that is hasn't been done, it feels to me, like with wrestling, right? Literally.
Yeah, well, they keep on coming. I mean, they had a fourth grader win the tag team championship at WrestleMania. They'll always come up with something. They'll always be, but it's turned into more of a festival atmosphere.
Sure.
It's more like going to a concert where, like if you go to a concert and the singer tells everybody to put their hands up and you sway back and forth, and it's sort of like a group mentality now. It's sort of taken the individuality out of wrestling, and you're watching it with your brain, not with your heart and your gut. And I'm a fan of heart and gut, to emote and to react to what's going on viscerally, not because there's something on the screen that's telling me to stand and do a certain thing, to chant yes or whatever.
I'm strange, man. I'm 50. I turned 50 this year. I'm just not entertained by the same stuff I used to be entertained by. You know what I mean? Like I literally, in a lot of ways, whether it's music, whether it's sports, whether it's a ball game, the things that suck me in at 50 are way different than the things that suck me in at 15. And I guess that speaks to anyone. I am still shocked that it's become bigger and better, and it's so over-the-top entertainment now that nobody believes what's happening in the ring. They know it's a show, and I think that the sport went out of its way, or the business went out of its way to stay kayfabe for so long, right? Like, that would have been the worst thing in the world, is for people to know it was not real or not staged in the 70s, and now it's the open secret, and it's thrived under that format, though. That's the amazing part of it, right?
Yeah, but it's still possible. The WWE doesn't do it, and they don't go for it. But there are other promotions that do, where it's still possible for them to capture you for a few minutes and suspend that disbelief. It's no different than going to the movies, and that it's all special effects.
Well, the ending is predetermined in every movie. I mean,
right.
Someone decided how it was going to end, right?
But I'm talking about the moments. Let's say you go to a horror film.
Oh, right. You don't know who's going to live or die. Right. Yeah. Sure.
But I'm talking about grabbing you emotionally.
Sure.
Where you're on the edge of your seat because you're taken to another place.
Yeah, you're about to get murdered, not the person on the screen. Right. Like you're in it.
You're feeling for the person that you're seeing. And there's still that style of wrestling out there, just not prominent like the WWE, but they are growing because of all the online platforms that they have, where they don't need a syndicated wrestling show on broadcast TV anymore. And people find them online and follow. And New Japan has been coming into the United States, and it's a more realistic presentation of pro wrestling.
Yeah, it's wrestling, not necessarily everything that goes around, all the accoutrement. He is Gary Michael Cappetta. He's been my friend for a couple of decades. He writes books. He has a live tour coming to Baltimore on July 6th. We've been discussing Andre the Giant as well as wrestling and kayfabe and all that stuff. You can find him at Gary Cappetta. That's 2 P's, 2 T's, out on Twitter as well as at Facebook. And Beyond Body Slams comes to town on July the 6th. You can learn all about that up there and buy the tickets. Gary, I'll bring you back on here late June. We'll talk some more. We'll hit some Ric Flair and some Bruno and some other stories of wrestling lore as you make your way to town this summer. Appreciate you picking up on quick notice and coming on and telling some Andre stories. Nobody does it better than you, really.
I'd love it. I'll give you an update on what we're going to see at the show when I come to Baltimore, and we'll talk in about a month and a half.
Yeah, share those pictures this week. I'll be looking for those out on Twitter, all right?
Cool.
You got it. Gary Michael Cappetta, All-Star Wrestling, Championship Wrestling, sanctioned by the State Athletic Commission. There it is. BuyAToyota.com Audio Vault is here 24 hours a day for anything you miss. Lots of baseball, lots of hockey, getting ready for the Stanley Cup playoffs, getting ready for the draft. Schedule coming out. Brigade playing down at the Rofo Arena beginning on Friday night. You can learn more at Monumental Sports as well as at BaltimoreBrigade.com. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.